is modern architecture? Modern architecture, developed and created with a social, aesthetic, and cultural mindset referred to as modernism. It places a huge emphasis on innovation, rejecting established rules, and promoting freedom of expression in music, art, literature, and architecture. The modern movement in architecture emerged in the 20th century and really took off after World War I. As previous historical forms were rejected and advances in engineering, building materials, social equality, health, and industry joined together. Another issue that modern architecture sought to address was the growing urban population. People from rural areas were moving to cities because of immigration and emerging industries like steelmaking, and cities needed to build new workplaces, factories, and homes to accommodate this population expansion. Buildings and furniture could be manufactured swiftly and reasonably cheap thanks to new mass production processes. Modern architecture evolved over time to include regional adaptations that suited regional requirements and aesthetic preferences. It eventually spread around the world. Modernism was influenced by the Enlightenment, Age of Reason, which brought the Industrial Revolution. This influence was based on rationalism, which dates back to Descartes and refers to the idea that the universe is a machine that obeys mechanical laws. Le Corbusier famously said, "A house is a machine for living in 1921, referring to a structure with a simplified form of a well-made machine and architecture that serves as machine parts. One of the fundamental concepts of modernism is defined by this machine aesthetic, which originates from Descartes. Adolf Loos, a pioneer of modernism, also influenced modernism. The phrase ornamentation is a crime was used by Luz in an essay that was published in 1908. By crime, he meant the waste of resources such as labors and materials. He believed that decoration had no purpose, place, or value in modern society since modern man valued simplicity. Modernism emphasis on simplicity and the removal of decoration was a reflection of this aesthetic purism with practical reasoning. Facts on modern architecture. Many people believe that modern buildings are almost identical to one another. However, the modernist legacy truly includes much more than what is typically thought of as a modern architecture. In fact, modern architecture is much more than just flat roof, black or gray steel and glass boxes. Even structures that initially appear to be nearly identical frequently contain subtle, even completely different features. Modernism is also known as international style, since the structures fit into almost any urban environment anywhere in the world. There are three major elements that comprise modernism. The first major element of modernism is the idea of volume versus mass. A ground level lobby in modernist buildings is often transparent and set back on the street. Many modernist structures seem to be lifted above the ground as a result of this. Modernist structures could be seen as providing an envelope for the space they inhabit with their usual large glass windows. Buildings that are traditionally constructed are seen as heavy, closed structures that contain the space they occupy. The second one is minimal applied exterior ornamentation. The majority of traditional structures built before the modernist era were decorated with classically inspired ornamentation like columns and friezes. These decorative features disappeared with modernism, which emphasized a manufactured appearance. The Inland Steel building in Chicago, which is covered in ornamental stainless steel to represent the name of the developer, is a well-known example of a modernist structure that does not always lack outside ornamentation. The third and last is regularity versus symmetry. Prior to the modernist era, traditionally built structures prioritize symmetry, or the balance of elements on either side of a building. For instance, a doorway was normally in the center of a wall, with equal distances between windows and other structures on either side. Modernism replaces symmetry with regularity, as evident in the predictable lines of windows.
Modern architecture depended on utilizing novel construction techniques and materials like reinforced concrete, steel, and glass. This architectural style was very in, especially for the government buildings and universities, until the 1980s, where it started to face strong competition from the other new schools like postmodernism and neo-modernism. Modernism is responsible for many of architecture's most prominent household names, both in terms of build structure and the architects behind them. Falling Water is located in the mountains of southwestern Pennsylvania, also known as the Laurel Highlands in Lafayette County, which is about 70 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. Right designed falling water to rise above the waterfall over which it is built. Local craftsmen quarried native sandstone and other materials from the property and completed the construction of the main house, guest house, and service wing in 1939. Falling Water's landscape has been transformed by water and rock when the continental plate containing North and South America collided with the continental plate containing Africa. About 300 million years ago, it has a big impact on what would become the barren landscape. Multiple layers of sandstone, shale, and limestone were forced up into long parallel ridges. Since then, moving water has gradually eroded the softer limestone and shale, creating the stream we know as the Bear Run, which cascades from more resistant sandstone ledges to create series of waterfalls. These long and relatively narrow psychographic regions stretches from northern Georgia to southern portion of New England. The terrain consists of ridges, plateaus, steep slopes, and dramatic gorges. Landform variation that they provide a vast range of orientation, elevation, and moistures that, in turn, dictates the various expression of the forest. Here are some lineup of famous modern architects that shine on the modern architecture. First is Le Corbusier, Ludwig Maltz van der Rohe, Marcel Breuer, Arne Jacobsen, Walter Gropius, Frank Lloyd Wright, Louis Kahn, Philip Johnston, Geoffrey Bawa, and Robert Boyd.
Architecture is the art and technique of designing and building, as distinguished from the skills associated with construction. It is both the process and the product of sketching, conceiving, planning, designing, and constructing building or other structures. Modern architecture or modernist architecture was architectural movement or style based upon a new and innovative technologies of construction. The characteristics of modern architectures are briefly: form follows function, rejects ornaments, clean geometry, and preserves the natural appearance of the materials. The following I will mention is the features commonly seen in modern architecture. First is the lack of ornament. Decorative molding and elaborate trim are eliminated or greatly simplified, giving way to a clean aesthetic where materials meet in simple and well-executed joints. Emphasis of rectangular forms and horizontal and vertical lines. Shapes of houses are base boxes or link boxes. Materials are often used in well-defined planes and vertical forms. Use of traditional materials in new ways. Materials such as wood, brick, and stone are used in simplified ways, reflecting a modern aesthetic. Traditional clapboard siding are replaced with simple vertical board cladding used in large, smooth planes. Brick and stonework are simple, unornamented, and rectilinear masses and planes. Emphasis on open, flowing interior spaces. Living spaces are no longer defined by walls, doors, and hallway. Living, dining, and kitchen spaces tend to flow together as part of one contiguous interior space, reflecting a more casual and relaxed way of life. Generous use of glass and natural light. Windows are no longer portholes to the outside, but large expanses, floor to ceiling glass, providing dramatic views and introducing natural light deep into the interior homes. Modern architecture emerged at the end of the 19th century from revolutions in technology, engineering, and building materials, and from the desire to break away from historical architectural styles and to invent something that was purely functional and new. And the modern movement in architecture was born in the 20th century and really took off after World War I. Advancement in engineering, building materials, social equality, health, and industry converged, while past historical styles were rejected. After the end of World War II in 1945, many mass housing applications with new construction methods are seen in Europe. The construction built in a short time in Western European countries are mostly under the supervision and leadership of engineers. Thus, a great uniformity based on prefabrication and mass production occurs in residential buildings, with this monotony being seen in other buildings as well as in the house. In the mid-60s, reactions against modern architecture began to increase. Against the idea that may summarize as less is more, the slogan less is a bore summarizes the reaction. New architectural movements emerge, aiming to wage war against modern architecture and to overcome the limiting doctrine of modern movement with the pursuit of diversity. This movement can also be described as the Mannerist phase of modern architecture. Modern architecture theoretically rejected the ISMS, and the names of the new movements that oppose it are often referred to with ISMS. Even modern architecture is now referred to as modernism. The main one of these movements are New Brutalism, Metabolism, Late Modernism, Postmodernism, Deconstructivism. The most famous example of modern architecture generally ended in the middle of the 20th century. However, the design style continued to influence buildings into the late 20th century.
In summary of what exactly modern architecture is a style of building that emphasizes function and a streamlined form over ornamentation. This design aesthetic is a departure from more elaboration and decorated homes like Queen Anne, Victorian, or Gothic Revival style. Modern architecture usually involves sharp and clean lines.
that shine on the modern architecture. First is Le Corbusier, Ludwig Maltz van der Rohe, Marcel Breuer, Arne Jacobsen, Walter Gropius, Frank Lloyd Wright, Louis Kahn, Philip Johnston, Geoffrey Bawa, and Robert Boyd.
The birth of modern design came with the thought that form should follow function. This idea started with architect Louis Sullivan, who designed buildings for the 1893 Chicago World Fair. That mantra became the foundation of modern architects. In summary, modern architecture began in the early 90s and ended around 1960, when more contemporary design took over. The basic principles of modern architecture include form following function, clean lines, and lack of ornamentation. Eventually, modern principles became too cold for everyday living due to an excess of space, the stark nature of the building materials.